So hello everyone. During this short session, I will tell you something about composite controls, which is a new way how to write code-only controls in .vvm. And also I will show you a short demo of work-in-progress project which we are currently developing, which is support for Bootstrap 5. So let's start with a few words about what is Bootstrap 5 in context of .vvm. So basically, right now, when you go to .vvm documentation, you will already see that besides basic set of controls, this native .vvm controls, we also have a set of business spec controls, which are a special set of controls, and then we have a set of controls for Bootstrap 3 and 4. So, and this is basically the next upgrade of this package. And it's basically a package or a set of more than 50 controls that gives you, as a developer, a clean and short syntax and basically wraps around the native Bootstrap 5 controls, and gives you the same developer experience as with native .vvm controls. So, for example, you can bind your modal dialog is displayed property to some kind of Boolean property in your view model. And so basically the API is practically very clean and short. And basically no other JavaScript, for example, is needed. So basically .vvm makes sure and initialize everything for you. But because we are living in this new era when JavaScript is sometimes needed, we decided in Bootstrap 5, in this new upgrade, we make it so that if you want, you can still get an instance of this particular Bootstrap control and maybe modify or customize it to your needs. So JavaScript is not needed, but it's still possible. And what is composite control? So basically, composite control is a new way how to declare code-only controls, and this way of writing code-only controls was introduced in the latest version of .vvm 4.0. And basically, what it gives you is a very again clean and intuitive way how to write code-only controls. So, for example, as an example, I have here an alert control from Bootstrap 4. So, as you can see on the left side, we have this huge document with some kind of properties and some methods. And as a whole, it takes 182 lines of code to initialize and render this alert Bootstrap 4 control. And on the right side, you basically see the same alert. It's basically the same control, but in Bootstrap 5. But it gives a developer the same control API. So the properties are basically the same, and control has the same features. But it doesn't take so much lines to implement, and also it's very obvious what the control does from this method body, as you can see. So again, this old way of writing code-only controls, as you can see on the left side, is still possible. We still kept it in the framework. But, for example, to declare a property for a control, you should declare or write 6 lines of code just to declare a simple string property. So how do we do that new way, and this minimalistic way, the better way? Basically, here on the left side, you can see a simple example of a image button component. So this is the name of the component, image button. And what it has to inherit from to be a composite control is inherit from composite control class, and also declare static get contents method. This method doesn't have to be static, but it has to be public. And it can return either one .vvm control or multiple .vvm controls, so enumerable or array of .vvm controls. if we take a look at the properties, so to declare the property text, we can basically give it an argument as a, for example, string argument image URL, and this way we just say, okay, this image button control now have a string property image URL. But let's begin. Let's start from the beginning. This text property. You can see this a special class, which is also was introduced with this composite controls. And this special class, a generic class, value or binding, basically says, okay, this text property can handle either static value, as you can see on the right side in this usage. It can either take just a simple static string test, or it can also take the binding. So I can bind my string property from view model to this property text. Also, it has a special attribute default value, which says basically, okay, this value or binding is not nullable, but it's not required by the developer to write this text property everywhere, because the default value for this particular property is button. So as you can see from the usage again, the only required property is click, and without click your page simply doesn't compile. But we can simply say, okay, this click is also nullable, and it also has to introduce a default value as null. Yeah, so the next one is iCommand binding property. Argument, and this basically says, okay, this click property can be mapped to some kind of command binding, so either a simple command or static command. And then we have this string argument image URL, and again, it's not required because it introduces the default value, but because it's not value or binding, but just a simple type string, it means it can only handle a static value. So as you can see from the usage, it's not required, but the last image button has this property, and it's overwritten by my image JPEG. If we take a look to the body of a method, it basically reuses the existing native .vvm control, which is link button, which is a simple A tag, and it also passes the property click by simply writing the set property method. And because of the Fluent API, right after the set property, you can just write, for example, next set property, or as we can see here, append children, where you basically say, okay, I want to render some additional components inside my A tag. So in this case, we see it renders some HTML generic control image, where we set attribute source with set attribute method to image URL. And right next to it, we render the new literal, which is just a simple text, where we set property text like to render the simple text. Basically, the rule is when, for example, if you ask when to use value or binding type of string and where to use string as a simple type, the rule basically is if you want to make some kind of changes when your, for example, client-side changes, when your page is already loaded, then it means you need to pass a binding there. So it's a good option to either introduce value or binding or e-value binding, which is an interface which you can also pass there to cover the whole hierarchy of types which you can pass to this getContents method. You can visit this page and simply take a closer look. Which is the next thing I want to talk about, which is also introduced in .vvm 4.0, and it's very helpful while developing this code-only composite controls, are control capabilities. And this is basically a way how to couple multiple control properties together into single class, and also reuse, for example, the validation logic which you want to use with these properties, or some kind of rendering logic basically across multiple controls. So maybe just let's switch to the demo. And as I said, this is a like work in progress, real project which we are developing right now. So shout out to my developer team, everyone. And here, as we can see, we have a special folder for all kinds of capabilities, because we want to reuse them across all these different Bootstrap controls. And very good one, or very good example of a simple capability is this text store template. So as you can see, we have to make the capability work or introduce. It has to be a record, and also it has to have this special .vvm control capability attribute. Basically the properties which we before declared in this getContents class as an arguments, here we can declare just as a simple properties. It's what's also important. The feature was introduced in C# 9, I think. Are also the records and this init, which means it's not a setter, but it's a setter from constructor only. And yeah, so basically this particular capability has two properties. First one is nullable text property, and the next one is template or of type template. And our convention of this particular project, yours can be something different, is that every capability has some kind of public toControls method, which also can take all kinds of different parameters. These are different across different capabilities. And here, as you can see, basically we have some kind of validation. So user, when using this particular capability, user can use either text or template, or doesn't have to use both. So none of these are required, but user cannot use text and template at the same time. So here we have a validation with a .vvm control exception. So please, it's not possible. So you have some kind of error in your code, and then we just make the same. We are just rendering the DOM as we did in this last example. So we have some kind of wrapper where we place some kind of CSS class, and then we just make all this logic around the text. And if the text is not null, and then we have template, yeah, with which we also return inside this wrapper, thanks to this template host. And if none of these conditions apply, then we just return null, because it's also a valid state for our particular example. Yeah, so here we have, because we have a nullability on our project, so Visual Studio is saying us, okay, it's a possible no reference return, but because we are in this control rendering world, it's perfectly okay to sometimes return a null. Yeah, so I don't have much time, so I wanted to show you two more controls. One is pretty simple, and the other one is more complicated. So let's begin with a simpler one. I have this spinner control, which is inherits from Bootstrap Composite control. If you go here, just to take a look at the implementation, here we say basically, okay, because you're using a Bootstrap, please add the required resource .vvm bootstrap script resource name, which is a special script which we bundle together with a nugget package, so everything works together. And again, we say, okay, because it's a composite control, it has one getContents method, which returns HTML generic control. Here, as a first argument, we have this HTML capability. So this one is a special capability, which is actually available from the box, from framework. And here we can see that it introduces these common properties which you can be familiar with when you, for example, used some kind of native control. So we have an ID, we have a visible property, and then we have all these different CSS styles and CSS classes. Properties, it means you basically can, if you want, to pass some kind of CSS class to your like this to your wrapper here. So here we're basically saying, okay, return me a div element, and also because we are in this spinner, we say, okay, pass here this visual CSS style for this particular spinner. If we go here and take a look on these enums here, we can see that we have spinner size, type, and visual type. All these three enums are like, except of Bootstrap text color, are like special for spinner. And if we take a look on implementation, we see that this particular enum has also attribute enum member with a value. So if we go right now and take a look on the Bootstrap 5 documentation, how the spinner looks like, we will see that it can be two sizes. So again, we here have two sizes. Then it can have like different color, and there are two visual styles possible. So we have a spinner with a border and a spinner with a grow. So it has different animation. And also, yeah, for screen reader, we have here additional property where you can define what will be rendered for the screen reader's text. And so why use enums for these particular properties? Why don't just have strings there? Well, that's because in the future version of our extension, it will be like very easy to basically have an IntelliSense for this particular size property, because our extension will know that spinner size will have only these two properties. It can be either default or small, and so then your developer experience will be like much better. And also, what is great about this particular example, that we have this toEnum string method, which basically takes your enum and takes a look of this particular value, and then grabs a value from enum member attribute. So basically here we add a few necessary CSS classes like visual style and type, and then we also have this size issue. So when it's not default, we paste there this visual style, and then we concatenate it with a size together, so it will render the correct CSS class. Then we add a simple attribute like role status. It's some accessibility attribute, and then we also, for these readers, we append a child, some span element with CSS class visually hidden, and literal screen reader only text. Yeah, because the screen reader is additional property which is not required, but basically it's possible to override it and paste some kind of localized string there. If we can take a look, because I have it here, and we take a look on the spinner, we can see that like this all these different samples we have here, and this like works perfectly fine. Okay, so this was a very easy component to implement and to describe. Maybe let's move to some more hardcore stuff. Here we have a breadcrumb component. So for you who don't know what breadcrumb is, it's basically a component which helps you navigate through pages. If you take a look on the final results, so the breadcrumb, we can see it basically like this chain of links which you can basically, let's say, generate. And if you take a look on the, for example, Bootstrap 4 and API of a breadcrumb there, you will see that you can either pass a data source and basically say, okay, we have this particular binding for text, particular binding for whatever this item is enabled or not, and stuff like that. And or you can also pass there the breadcrumb items. So if you take a look on this sample page, as I showed you here, we have a particular project with samples, and if you navigate to breadcrumb basic, you can see that these basically are a declaration of some static breadcrumb items. So, but there's also possible to use this data source with some binding to links, and then pass their text and param ID and stuff like that, as you can see here. But how do we actually implement it with composite controls? So again, we have this getContents method with HTML capability. We covered that already, but the more interesting stuff is here. We have this special capability called item or data source. Currently, I think it's a capability inside. Yeah, it's a capability inside our project, like Bootstrap 5. But we are thinking about releasing it also outside, so you to the framework, so you can actually use it too. And here, it basically says, okay, we have a items property, but also we have a data source property. So we can either use data source and generate the items dynamically, or have items and have like static items on your page. And also yeah, so with the data source we have item template if you don't want to use like specific control, but want to use your template instead. And then besides this item or data source capability, we have list item capability, which is quite complicated capability, but what's important is that because we are on this parent wrapper element, we need to basically say here that for every property in this list item capability, we want to have a prefix item. It's basically it's a breaking change if you compare it to Bootstrap 4 controls API. In Bootstrap 4 we had this convention that every binding which you set on a wrapper parent control have this binding suffix. But here we decided that we use this new approach and use an item prefix. So basically if we move back, you can see that this breadcrumb item can have a text link ID, link 1, but when you use data source and you use this breadcrumb parent element, it's not just a text property, but it's item text. Yeah, and this particular rule is for every other property. So we have item navigate URL, item enabled, stuff like that. If you go back, what's very cool and why this like capability functionality is very cool, that basically it's because we can use the capability here in this breadcrumb, but the same capability is used in breadcrumb item. So as you can see, this breadcrumb item, which is also a standalone control, as you can saw, so we also use it as a standalone component, have in getContents only this one particular argument, which is list item capability. Yeah, and as you can see, sorry, as you can see, we have all kinds of different logic here. I don't want maybe to go like too deep into this, because it doesn't look that nice as a spinner, for example, but it's also because it's like more complicated control. But what's cool about it, that we still use like some we can still move some kind of logic, for example, to capabilities itself. So you can see we have these two controls capability, and because we use this capability across different controls, you can see that a lot of logic is hidden here. But like as a whole, this implementation looks actually pretty like readable, and it doesn't take 184 lines of code to understand, and you don't have to like scroll through it all the time. Yeah, and the same applies for this parent breadcrumb. Yeah, and yeah, so the last one is here is some kind of divider, so you can also pass it as a CSS style argument. Okay, so this way you can actually I showed you like two Bootstrap controls. One is more complicated, one is less complicated. There is a possibility to still use the old way how to write code only controls, but for what we are trying to do is that we're still like developing the .vm framework itself, and we're still adding new features. So you don't have to use this old approach, but to use just only this one new better approach instead. And that's it from my side. Yeah, I showed you the demo, these two controls. If you have any questions about these composite controls, you can either ask here in the chat or use our community Glitter chat, where our .vm community lives, and where you can also find all kinds of different questions and answers. And stay tuned until the next session, and thank you for watching.